sorry I didn't call.
Whatever happens to you and Alex, get over it. Okay, get your ass to Barcelona.
David. Hello? David?
That was a good one. No, it's funny because before I thought you were firing me from our road trip.
No, I just really want to get on the road. It's a long drive. I don't really get to handle traffic.
Dude, I'm sure we'll be fine. Shit. You hate this song. How is it possible that you hate this song?
It's just the size.
Welcome to the Cine Flux. Today we are spending time with People We Meet on Vacation. People We Meet on Vacation is a 2026 American romantic comedy film released on Netflix on January 9th of this year. It was directed by Brett Haley, whose previous work includes Heartbeat, Loud and All the Bright Places, two films that already announced him as a director with a genuine and uncommon sensitivity to the interior lives of young people, to the kinds of love that are difficult to place and even more difficult to let go of. The screenplay was written by Yuling Kwang, Amos Vernon, and Nunzio Randazzo, working from what has become one of the defining romantic novels of this decade, Emily Henry's 2021 bestseller of the same name, which debuted at number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list and has since sold over 2 million copies in the United States alone. This was Henry's first novel to be adapted for the screen, and the cultural anticipation around it was considerable, not just from the enormous readership she had cultivated, but from a wider audience that had heard the book described again and again as the kind of love story that leaves a mark on you. The film stars Emily Bader as Poppy, a New York City-based travel writer who has begun to feel quietly lost inside the life she once imagined as freedom, and it stars Tom Blyth as Alex, a methodical, deeply gentle man who prefers the certainty of good books and familiar places to the open road. Poppy wants to explore everything. Alex wants to understand the things already in front of him. They should not, by any reasonable measure, be friends. And yet, from the moment they first share a car ride from Boston to their small Ohio hometown, both of them strangers who happen to need the same lift, they become something to each other that neither of them quite has language for. Over the course of 10 years, they build a ritual, 1 week of summer vacation together every year. Different places, different versions of themselves. The same inexplicable pull. The supporting cast surrounds them with real color. Sarah Catherine Hook plays Sarah, Alex's girlfriend and later his ex, a character who could easily have been reduced to an obstacle but who, in the film's most quietly generous gesture, turns out to be something far more honest than that. Jamila Jamil brings her particular brand of sharp, warm energy to the film. Lucien Leviscount, Miles Heiser, and Lucas Gage are all present and alive in their roles. Molly Shannon and Alan Ruck appear in smaller but memorable moments that ground the story in a world that extends beyond its two leads. This is at its heart a film about friendship as the highest form of love. That is a distinction that matters deeply because so many films of this genre treat friendship as a stepping stone, a preliminary stage that must be outgrown on the way to something real. This film treats it as the destination. The romantic love that eventually arrives is not presented as something that replaces or surpasses the friendship. It is presented as the natural completion of it, as the thing the friendship was always moving toward without either person knowing how to say so. That is a genuinely different way of thinking about love, and it shapes everything about how this film is constructed. Brett Haley, in interviews, spoke about his desire to make a film that felt less like a traditional romantic comedy and more like a long, unhurried memory, the kind of story you would tell someone at midnight, reaching back through years to find the moment something began. He wanted the audience to feel that they had traveled alongside Poppy and Alex, not merely watched them. And that ambition, that commitment to immersive emotional authenticity is visible in nearly every choice the film makes, from the way it structures its timeline to the way it frames a simple dinner table, two people eating something unremarkable in a place they will never forget. There's something worth naming about what it means for this novel to arrive on screen at this particular cultural moment. Emily Henry's books have become a kind of shared vocabulary for a generation of readers who grew up with the internet and who have spent years navigating the strange blurred terrain between friendship and desire that social media both amplifies and obscures. Her writing has always been interested in the ways that modern life makes it simultaneously easier and harder to know what we actually feel. The information is everywhere, but the clarity is nowhere. And people we meet on vacation, both on the page and now on the screen, asks a question that turns out to be much harder than it sounds. What if the person you have been looking for has been sitting right next to you all this time on every single adventure you thought you were taking alone? When I first sat with this film, I expected warmth, I expected charm, I expected two attractive people in beautiful locations moving through a story I had seen the outline of before. What I did not expect was the specific quality of quiet that Haley brings to the film's opening scenes, the particular register of a story that knows it is about something more than what it appears to be about and is in no hurry to announce that. The film opens in the present, and its present is a city being lit up for a wedding. Barcelona, all gold and warmth, its architecture rising around two people who have not spoken in 2 years and who must now share a word for a week. The atmosphere from the very first frame is that of a beautiful place that has been emptied of its beauty for one specific person, because Poppy, arriving in Barcelona, is arriving as someone who has quietly come apart inside the life she built. She is a travel writer who has stopped feeling anything when she travels. She is a person who has spent a decade cataloging wonder and who now sits in a hotel room in one of the most extraordinary cities in the world and feels almost nothing. And the camera does not make a drama of this, it simply shows it. The slight flatness in Emily Barder's eyes, the way she looks out the window without really looking, the way the city keeps being beautiful while she remains somewhere else entirely. And then Alex walks into the frame. I want to be careful here because what happens when Alex appears is one of those things that is very easy to describe and very difficult to explain. Tom Blyth does something in his first scene that I have seen other actors attempt and rarely seen executed this precisely. He communicates in the first moment he is on screen that this is a man who is used to containing very large feelings in a very small amount of visible space. There is a careful steadiness to him, a deliberateness. and underneath it, not hidden exactly but placed quietly to the side, the way you would put down something fragile while you dealt with something urgent. There is a feeling that has no clean name. That particular feeling I described at the beginning of this essay. The film opens with it in his face and spends nearly 2 hours earning the right to let it out. What struck me most in those first minutes was how the film handles the question of time. Many romantic films that use nonlinear structure to create mystery, to withhold information, to build toward a reveal. This film does something different. Its flashbacks are not withholding, they are giving. Every trip backward into the history of Poppy and Alex does not make the present more puzzling. It makes it more heartbreaking. By the time you understand what happened 2 years ago to break the friendship, you understand exactly why it broke and exactly what it cost both of them. And that understanding does not come as a surprise, it comes as a recognition. You already felt it in the way they were standing in that first scene in Barcelona, the careful distance between them, the way they talked about everything except the thing they needed to talk about. There is a great deal of skill in constructing a story this way, in building an emotional architecture that works in both directions simultaneously, where the flashbacks explain the present and the present recontextualizes the flashbacks, and where neither timeline ever feels like a detour from the other. It requires a screenplay that knows exactly what each scene is doing, and a director who trusts that the audience will keep up. Haley does both. The film establishes its rhythm early, a gentle, unhurried alternation between past and present that feels less like a structural device and more like the way memory actually works. You do not remember your past in order, you remember it in relation to your present. You remember the New Orleans trip because something in Barcelona just felt like New Orleans. You remember the night in the tent because you are standing outside a wedding venue and something in the air has the same quality of being about to change. I had not read the novel before watching the film, and I think that matters here. I came to this story through the screen without the knowledge of what had been left out or changed, and what I found was a film that felt complete in its own terms. Not exhaustive, not comprehensive, but complete. It had the feeling of a story that had been distilled rather than simply abbreviated. Every scene that remained had the quality of having been chosen deliberately for reasons that would reveal themselves, and that is rarer than it should be in literary adaptation. The process of turning a book into a film is so often a process of reduction that becomes loss, subtraction that becomes absence. This film, though imperfect and not without its own particular kinds of loss, felt like a translation, something that had found a new form without abandoning its essential truth. So let me walk with you now through the emotional journey of this film, through its structure as a lived experience, through the specific texture of what it feels like to sit inside the story for 115 minutes. The film opens, as I said, in the present, Barcelona, a wedding. Two people who used to be everything to each other now trying to figure out how to be in the same room without either running toward or away from what they feel. Poppy has come here under false pretenses. She has told Alex that she is in Barcelona for work, for an article, when the truth is that she came because she could no longer live in the silence of not knowing. She is the one who broke the friendship 2 years ago, though the film does not tell you this immediately. It shows you the wound first, lets you feel the absence of the friendship before it explains how the friendship was lost, and this sequence matters enormously to how the story lands emotionally. We learn in the film's first extended flashback how Poppy and Alex met. The year is roughly a decade before the film's present. They are both young, both broke, both making the long trip back to their small Ohio hometown of Linfield after a semester in Boston. They share a car because it is practical. They are polite but wary of each other at first. He is carrying a stack of books, she is carrying a camera and a restlessness that he finds both baffling and oddly magnetic. The conversation that develops over those hours is one of the film's quite early triumphs. Not quackling with wit, not laden with obvious romantic tension, but genuinely alive in the way that conversations between people who are about to become important to each other can be. They are not performing for each other, they are just talking. And in that talking, something begins. The first vacation comes the following summer. Poppy suggests it almost casually. She has found a cheap deal on a weekend somewhere. She does not want to go alone. She asks Alex in the tone of someone who expects to be turned down. He says yes. The trip is small and slightly disastrous in the charming ways that early friendships always are. Things go slightly wrong in ways that become funny in retrospect. They discover things about each other that surprise them. They come home with a memory that neither of them would have made alone. And then it becomes a ritual. The same week, the following year, and the year after that. What the film is building in this early section is not just a backstory, it is a vocabulary. Each vacation adds another shared word to a private language that only Poppy and Alex speak, a reference point, an inside joke, a moment of vulnerability that gets folded into the fabric of the friendship. By the time we reach the middle of the film's timeline, these references have accumulated into something that functions like a small private culture, a world that belongs only to the two of them. And the film allows you to feel the weight of that word before it shows you what happens when it clicks. The camping trip to Squamish is one of the film's most carefully constructed sequences. Alex has recently broken up with Sarah, his long-term girlfriend, the woman he had been with for years. The relationship that had always existed slightly in the background of the friendship, never quite central, but always present. Poppy takes him camping because she senses he needs motion, needs the particular medicine of a new place. They find themselves in Squamish, surrounded by mountains and the specific clarity that comes with elevation, and they spend the night around a fire with a group of strangers who are younger and louder and more reckless than either of them. There is a moment in this sequence where both Poppy and Alex are separately invited, separately tempted toward casual connection with other people, the kind of simple, uncomplicated physical intimacy that would be easy and meaningless. And instead, they both disengage from those separate invitations and find their way back to each other, back to the tent, back to the conversation, back to the thing that is harder and more real and that neither of them has yet named. They lie in the dark and they commit to the vacations. They decide, in the way of people who are doing something large while pretending to do something small, that this is what they will keep doing. Every summer, without fail, whatever else changes, this is theirs. And here is where the film shifts completely, because the New Orleans sequence, which comes next in the film's timeline, though not in its structure, because Poppy and Alex remember it together in Barcelona, while the air conditioning breaks in her hotel room, is where we begin to understand what the friendship has cost them, what they have been protecting it from, what they have been protecting themselves from. Alex has reconciled with Sarah by this point, and Poppy is dating someone she likes but does not love. And the two of them arrive in New Orleans for their annual week and find, almost immediately, that something between them is different. There is a tension that was not there before, or rather, a tension that was always there but had previously been manageable, like a low frequency you can hear only when everything else goes quiet. They pretend to be on their honeymoon in the loose and playful way that old friends sometimes inhabit a fiction together. It begins as a joke, a way to get a better table at a restaurant, and it becomes something else entirely over the course of the evening, something that lingers beyond the joke, something that is still in the air when they return to their respective rooms and lie in their separate beds in that beautiful hot city, and understand each of them alone that something has been acknowledged that cannot be unacknowledged. The film is very good at this, at the specific atmosphere of the thing that has not been said, but is now audible in every room they share. At the way that a week of vacation, with all its manufactured intimacy of shared meals and shared streets and shared hours, can hold a feeling that ordinary life has kept safely at a distance. At the way that travel, which is the genuine subject of this film, not just its setting, removes the noise that usually protects us from our own interior. You go somewhere new to see something new, and sometimes the new thing you see is yourself. The Norway trip that did not happen is, in some ways, the film's most crucial piece of backstory. They had planned it for years. Norway in the summer, the light that does not end, the fjords, the quality of silence that is specific to places that far north. And then Puppy gets sick, The kind of sick that grounds you, that takes you out of your life and deposits you on your couch and leaves you vulnerable in a way that is very hard to manage gracefully. Alex cancels Norway. He flies to New York instead. He sits on the floor of her apartment and makes her soup and reads to her, and is present in the specific way that he is, which is the way of someone who understands that being useful is the closest thing he knows to saying, I love you. And Poppy, receiving all of that, lying on her couch, grateful and overwhelmed and frightened by how much it means to her, begins to understand what she has been doing, and what she has been doing is dangerous. Not for her, not only, for both of them. For the clean, beloved structure of what they have built, and instead of speaking the thing that has begun to surface in her, she buries it. She lets it go quiet again, and everything continues. But things that are buried do not stay buried, they find their way to the surface through cracks. And 2 years before Barcelona, something finally cracked. The film does not tell you what, not yet. It holds that piece of the story with care. The way you hold a breakable thing when you are not yet sure where to put it down safely. It simply shows you the silence that followed. The 2 years of not speaking, the friends shaped hole in both their lives, and then Barcelona. And here is where the film shifts completely, because Barcelona is not just a backdrop, it is the thing itself. The last place, the place where everything that have been accumulating for a decade is finally required to answer for itself. Poppy has come here because she is desperate and because she misses him and because she cannot keep moving without knowing whether there is any chance of returning to what she lost. Alex has come here for his brother's wedding and does not yet know that Poppy being here is not an accident. And the film places them together in that gorgeous golden city and lets the history do its work. The story as an experience is one of the most genuinely moving things I have spent time with in recent memory in this particular genre. And I want to be careful about that word genre because this film is both perfectly of its genre and quietly larger than it. It is a romantic comedy in the sense that it uses the conventions and expectations of that form. But it is something else in the sense that it is actually about loneliness and the way we carry the people we love even when we are no longer carrying them literally, and the terror of asking for the thing you want most because the asking itself could cost you everything. That is not a particularly comic territory, it is a profound one, and the film inhabits it with a gentleness and an intelligence that I did not expect and that I am still, weeks later, thinking about. The pacing is worth remarking on here because it is one of the film's most deliberate artistic choices and also one of its most occasionally frustrating ones. Brett Haley's direction is patient in a way that contemporary studio films rarely are. He allows scenes to breathe. He allows characters to be in a moment rather than immediately passing through it on the way to the next narrative event. A dinner between Poppy and Alex in Barcelona. Nothing is said that is dramatically significant. No information is exchanged that changes the story, is simply allowed to exist as a dinner. Two people eating together the way they have eaten together dozens of times before, except that now the weight of the unsaid thing makes even the breath they are passing to each other feel freighted with meaning. Haley trusts that you can feel this. He does not underline it. He does not push the music up to tell you how to feel. He simply shows you the bread. He shows you Alex and he shows you Poppy watching it. This patience is not universal in the film. There are places, particularly in the final 30 minutes, where the film's breath quickens in ways that feel slightly rushed, where emotional developments that deserve more room to unfold are moved through more quickly than the story has earned. But in its first two-thirds, the pacing is one of the things that makes this film feel genuinely special, that makes it feel less like a film you are watching and more like a memory you are inside. Film is character driven in the fullest sense of that phrase, not just in the sense that it prioritizes character over plot, but in the sense that the characters are themselves the plot. What happens in this film at every level is a direct expression of who Poppy and Alex are, their individual fears, their individual desires, the specific incompatibility of their relationship to risk and permanence. Poppy's compulsive need to keep moving is not a background characteristic. It is the engine of the story. Alex's fundamental groundedness, his comfort with the known and the settled, is not a personality detail. It is the core tension. These two people love each other with a completeness that is rare, and they are genuinely, structurally, temperamentally afraid of what that love requires. Think about what that means for a moment. Think about the courage it takes to stay beside someone you love year after year and to keep the love in the form it is in because you are terrified of what happens if it changes shape. Think about the exhaustion of that, the loneness of it. You are not alone. You have this person, this extraordinary person who knows you better than almost anyone. And you are alone in the most essential sense because you cannot tell them the thing that matters most, because the friendship is too precious to risk. Because what if the love you feel is not reciprocated in the form you feel it? What if naming it destroys the only thing you have? This is the emotional core of people we meet on vacation, and it is a core that the film excavates with real depth and real care. And here is where the film shifts completely, because the question it has been asking all along is not whether Poppy and Alex will get together, it is whether they will find the courage to deserve each other. What this film achieves at the level of performance is something that romantic comedies ask for constantly and receive only rarely. Two leads who are genuinely, consistently, convincingly in love with each other in the specific way the story requires. Not the performed intensity of a film that needs you to believe its leads are attractive together, something quieter and more lived in than that. Emily Barder and Tom Blyth do not play people who are discovering their feelings over the course of the film. They play people who have always had their feelings and have spent a decade finding increasingly elaborate ways not to act on them. That is a fundamentally different acting challenge, and both of them meet it with a precision that I found genuinely startling. Let me start with Emily Bader, because Poppy is arguably the more complex of the two roles, and because Bader carries the entire emotional architecture of the film on her shoulders in a way that only becomes fully visible once you have seen it. Poppy could very easily become unsympathetic. She's the one who breaks the friendship. She's the one who keeps running. She's the one who, when Alex finally opens himself to her, hesitates at the exact moment when hesitation is most costly. And yet, at no point in this film do you stop being on her side. At no point do you want to shake her rather than hold her. Buddha makes this possible through an extraordinary quality of interiority, through the work she does in her face, in the spaces between dialogue, in the moments when Poppy is not speaking and the camera simply stays with her. There is a particular scene, relatively early in the Barcelona section of the film, where Poppy stands alone on the roof of the hotel at night and looks out over the city. She says nothing. She does nothing. She simply stands there with the city spread out below her, and the knowledge of what she has come here to risk, and the weight of the 2 year silence pressing down on her from all sides. Butter makes that silence speak. You understand in those 2 minutes of wordlessness more about who Poppy is and what this week means to her than most films communicate in an entire first act. That is the scene that proves it completely. Tom Blyth brings something different and equally essential to Alex. His work here is slower, more interior, more committed to the discipline of a man who has learned to hold himself carefully. What Blythe understands about Alex, and this is a genuine interpretive intelligence at work, not just a reading of the script, is that Alex's quietness is not passivity. It is a form of restraint that is costing him something constant. Every time he does not say the thing he wants to say, it registers in his body. The slight tension in his jaw, the way he directs his gaze just slightly away from Poppy in moments of high feeling, like someone walking past a window with too much light coming through it. Bleat is doing something very sophisticated with physical economy. He is playing a man of enormous feeling who has become expert at not expressing it. And he is letting you see both things simultaneously, the feeling and the containment. The scene that demonstrates this most purely is a moment in the New Orleans flashback where Alex watches Puppy laughing at something across the room. He is not in the conversation, he is at the edge of it, watching. and the expression on his face is one of those rare things that an actor can only truly achieve when they are no longer performing, when they have genuinely arrived at the place the character lives. It is love, uncomplicated, unbearable love, and he puts it away almost as quickly as it appears, the way you close a window when the weather turns. But you saw it. That is the one shot in this film that has not left me. The chemistry between them is real in the specific sense that matters, not the chemistry of sexual electricity, though that is also present and handled with admirable restraint, but the chemistry of two people who have genuinely inhabited a shared history together. The way they finish each other's sentences without noticing, the way they navigate each other's space, not carefully, not with the choreographed proximity of two actors hitting their marks, but with the loose and self-conscious ease of people who have spent enough time together that the other's physical presence is simply part of the landscape. This took work. Director Brett Haley has spoken about the amount of time he spent with Bader and Blyth before filming began, building their shared vocabulary, letting them accumulate the texture of a friendship on camera. That investment is completely visible in the finished film, and it is one of the primary reasons the emotional payoff of the final act lands as hard as it does. The supporting cast earns particular mention for what they add without overreaching. Sarah Catherine Hook is remarkable in what is, on paper, a thankless role, the ex-girlfriend, who is also, in this genre's typical logic, the impediment. The film refuses that logic, and Hook refuses it with the film. Her Sarah is a fully realized person who made choices that were reasonable given what she knew, who was in a relationship that was not what she needed, and who knows that with a clarity that is both sad and dignified. The scene she shares with Poppy near the film's end, brief, airport lit, the kind of conversation that happens in terminal spaces and feels both accidental and inevitable, is handled by both actors with an honesty that complicates the film's emotional landscape in ways that make it richer. Hooker gives Sarah a generosity of spirit that transforms what could have been a simple plot clearing function into something that actually says something true about how breakups work and what it means to let someone go gracefully. Jamila Jamil brings wit and warmth to her role, functioning as the film's comic nervous system, the character whose energy creates movement when the film's quieter passages need a bit of lightness. She is very good at this, and Haley is very good at placing her moments precisely so that her humor never deflates the emotional tension but does, in the best tradition of comedy in drama, briefly give the tension somewhere to breathe before the next wave arrives. The writing in People We Meet on Vacation is, at its best, the kind of writing that disguises itself as conversation. The screenplay by Yulin Kwan, Amos Vernon, and Nuncio Dandazzo has the quality of very good literary adaptation done by writers who understood what the novel was actually about and went after that rather than simply transcribing its events. What the novel is about at its core is the interior life of love, the thoughts that accompany the feelings, the way the mind narrates itself, even as the heart does something the mind cannot entirely keep up with. Adapting that to the screen requires finding ways to make the interior visible without the explicitness of narration, and the screenplay does this with considerable skill through the use of the film's flashback structure and through dialogue that is always doing at least two things simultaneously. There is a line that Poppy speaks near the end of the film, the scene where she arrives in Linfield and confronts Alex, having quit her job and made the journey that represents for her the most courageous thing she has ever done, where she says that home does not have to be a place, that when you are with the person who loves you for who you are always home. It is the kind of line that could be sentimental in a way that collapses under its own weight. Instead, it lands. It lands because of the 2 hours of emotional preparation that precede it, because every vacation, every shared meal, every late night conversation in a strange city has been building to the understanding that home and freedom are not opposites, that you can be fully yourself and fully present in a place and a person simultaneously, that the adventure does not have to end when the love begins. The screenplay earns this line. It earns it the hard way, through accumulation and patience and trust in the audience's intelligence. That is screenwriting operating at a genuinely high level. The dialogue throughout is naturalistic in a way that feels effortless but clearly is not. Conversations between Poppy and Alex have the specific rhythm of a long friendship. They interrupt, they circle back, they reference things that happened years ago with the ease of people for whom the shared past is always present, always available. The New Orleans sequence has a scene at dinner where the conversation moves from the genuinely trivial to the genuinely intimate and back again in about 4 minutes, and the writing handles that movement with a fluency that only reveals its craft when you slow down and notice how much information has been communicated without any of it feeling like information delivery. This is what the novel's fans have described as the book's great quality. The feeling of being inside a friendship that is real enough to touch. The screenplay preserves that quality more successfully than you might expect, and more successfully than I expected. There are also lines in the film that reveal the screenplay's intelligence through their structural function, their ability to mean one thing in the moment they are spoken and something larger in retrospect. Alexa's early line about preferring to stay somewhere long enough to actually understand it rather than moving through a place so quickly you never really arrive. This is obviously a character note, a signal of his nature versus Poppy's. But it is also retroactively a line about their friendship, about what he has been doing all along, staying, understanding, being present with the same person long enough to actually see them. The screenplay seeds these moments with real care and trusts you to feel their weight later, when the context has accumulated. The visual language of Brett Haley's direction is one of the film's quiet pleasures, quiet being the operative word, because his visual style is not one that announces itself. He does not use the visual vocabulary of spectacle, of the grand sweeping romantic gesture rendered in golden light and swelling music. His camera is modest, it stays close to faces, it prefers the particular over the panoramic. Barcelona is strikingly beautiful, Squamish is genuinely breathtaking, New Orleans has a moody warmth that the camera captures with evident love, but Haley never allows the setting to upstage the people within it. The location is always the context for the characters, never the other way around. This is a discipline that not all directors maintain, and it matters enormously to how invested you remain in Poppy and Alex's story, even when the backdrop is doing everything it can to distract you. The 2 or 3 shots that stay with me most are not the conventionally beautiful ones. They are not the wide establishing shots of Barcelona at sunset or the mountain vistas of Squamish. They are smaller and stranger and more private than that. There is a shot in the airport near the end of the film where Poppy is standing among thousands of people in motion and the camera simply holds on her stillness, the world moving around her while she stands in it, suddenly understanding something. It is a few seconds long. It is the film in miniature. A woman who has spent her entire adult life in motion, discovering what it feels like to stop. Haley frames her small within the frame, not in the way that diminishes her, but in the way that contextualizes her. She is a person in a world full of other people, and she has just made the most private decision of her life in the most public space imaginable. The shot understands that. There is also a recurring choice in the framing of Poppy and Alex together, a preference for slight angles rather than full frontality, for frames in which they are turned just enough away from the camera that their eyes are not quite meeting the lens. This creates a quality of privacy, of intrusion into something that is genuinely theirs. You feel, watching these scenes, that you are overhearing rather than being told, that the camera has arrived into this space uninvited and is doing its best not to disturb what it finds. This quality, this reluctance to fully expose the characters, even while showing them to you, is one of the ways the film maintains its emotional credibility. It does not feel like a performance of intimacy, it feels like the actual thing. The score and sound design of the film deserve particular attention because they operate differently from what you might expect of a Netflix romantic comedy. The music is restrained in a way that is its own kind of statement. The score, largely unobtrusive, tends to arrive at the edges of scenes rather than at their centers. A few notes of something gentle as a scene begins, something that fades before the dialogue gets going, as if the music is not confident enough in its own presence to compete with what is actually happening between the people in the frame. This is, I believe, entirely intentional and entirely right. The film does not need the music to tell you what to feel. The music's restraint is a form of trust in the performances, in the writing, in you. There are moments of near silence that function as the score's most powerful statements. The scene in Poppy's hotel room when Alex's back gives out and the air conditioning has broken, and they are both slightly hot and slightly uncomfortable and lying on the floor talking. This scene has almost no music. The only sound is the room itself, the ambient noise of a hotel in Barcelona, the occasional distant sound of a city going about its business, and that silence is the score. It says these are just two people in a room talking, and that is the most important thing in the world right now. The absence of music in that scene is a more powerful compositional choice than anything a conventional romantic score could provide. When the music does fully arrive, when it rises in a way that is actually felt rather than simply registered, it is used sparingly enough that its arrival carries genuine weight. The moment near the film's end where Poppy is walking through Lingfield to find Alex is accompanied by something that builds slowly from almost nothing, and the build works because of the silence that precedes it. The entire film has been preparing you for that music, and when it comes, it feels earned in the way that only musical moments preceded by real restraint can feel earned. The craft and construction of the film as a whole is more sophisticated than its surface pleasures suggest. The editing, in particular, is doing complex and important work throughout, managing the film's non-linear timeline with a sure hand, finding the connections between past and present that give the flashbacks their emotional resonance rather than their merely structural function. There is a recurring technique in the editing, where a movement or gesture in the present day Barcelona footage is subtly echoed in the cut to the past. A particular way Poppy turns her head, the angle at which Alex holds a cup, that creates a continuity of character across time, a visual argument that these people have always been who they are, that the feelings visible in Barcelona were always there in Squamish and New Orleans and the car ride from Boston a decade ago. This is quiet, disciplined editing that deserves recognition precisely because it never draws attention to itself. The cinematography, warm without being saturated, real without being flat, does something specific with natural light that rewards attention. The Barcelona scenes are predominantly lit in the golden tones of late afternoon and early evening, the hour when the city is at its most seductive and the day's decisions are still possible to reverse. The flashbacks have a slightly different quality, a touch more blue in the shadows, a slightly harder edge to the light that creates a subliminal distinction between memory and present without being obvious enough to feel like a stylistic announcement. You feel the difference more than you see it. And that is the right way to handle a distinction between a remembered past and a lived present. The production design makes intelligent use of its faces. Hotel rooms are not glamorized, they are the slightly impersonal, slightly functional spaces that actual hotel rooms are, and that reality grounds the emotional content that takes place within them. The tent in Squamish is genuinely cramped and genuinely warm with the accumulation of two people's body heat in a small space, and Haley films it in a way that captures the physical proximity without making it salacious. The proximity is emotional rather than erotic, even though the erotics are quietly present beneath it. The New Orleans restaurant where the honeymoon pretense begins is dim and candlelit and slightly too small, which is exactly right, because that scene requires a physical closeness that a larger space would dissipate. Every technical layer of this film is in service of the same thing, the feeling of being inside a real relationship with real history between real people. That commitment to emotional authenticity runs from the screenplay through the performances, through the camera work, through the editing, through the sound design, and the result is a film that, despite its occasional imperfections, achieves something that is worth calling rare. It makes you feel like you know these people, And that knowledge, that investment, is what makes everything that happens in the final act genuinely cost something. Now, here is the part of this essay that requires honesty. Because no film that I love entirely is a film I can fully trust my account of. And people we meet on vacation, despite the warmth I feel for it and the genuine admiration I have for so much of what it does, is not a perfect film. It has flaws that are worth naming clearly and examining fairly because they are real and because understanding them is part of understanding the film. The most significant of these is a pacing issue in the final act that feels less like a deliberate choice and more like a structural concession. The film's final 30 minutes, from the moment Poppy and Alex sleep together in Barcelona through the wedding reception argument, the airport encounter with Sarah, and Poppy's journey to Linfield, move through emotional territory that the preceding 90 minutes has been carefully, patiently preparing for, and they do so at a speed that does not match the care with which the preparation was made. The argument at the wedding reception in particular feels compressed. The specific nature of their fundamental incompatibility, her need for motion, his need for ground, is articulated in the argument scene with clarity and real emotional intelligence, but articulated briefly in the heated shorthand of people who are saying old things in new words. And then it is over. The fight resolves not in the scene but in the time between the scene and Poppy's arrival in Linfield, which happens off screen. This matters to the experience as a whole because the entire emotional logic of the film has been arguing that these two people need to genuinely reckon with their fundamental differences, not just feel their feelings at each other, but actually grapple with the real question of whether a free spirit and a homebody can build a life that satisfies both of them. The final act gestures toward this reckoning but does not fully deliver it. Their resolution, Alex eventually moves to New York. They resume their vacations, is right and emotionally satisfying in its broad strokes, but it arrives somewhat quickly, with a time jump that elides the actual negotiation. We are told it was resolved. We are not shown the resolution. And given how carefully the film has shown us everything else, this felt like an absence rather than a restraint. This is, many viewers and critics have noted, a problem that is at least partly structural, the problem of translating a book that has the space to fully inhabit each phase of its story into a film that must arrive at its ending within a commercially viable runtime. The novel's readers have largely noted that the film's compressed ending is one of the places where the adaptation loses something irreplaceable from the source. And having not read the book, I can still feel the loss, not in relation to what the book must have done, but in relation to what the film itself has been promising to do and does not quite deliver. It is a real wound rather than a minor texture. It does not ruin the film, but it does prevent the film from being the great romantic film it occasionally threatens to become. There is also an inconsistency in the film's handling of Alex as a character that is worth noting. The book, by multiple accounts, establishes Alex as someone deeply defined by his relationship with literature, a reader in the most devoted sense, someone for whom books are not a hobby but a framework for understanding the world. The film carries this trait but does not develop it with the same richness. Alex has his books, they are present in the frame when he is introduced, referenced in dialogue, but the film does not spend much time exploring what his relationship with reading means for who he is and how he experiences the world. This matters because one of the thematic oppositions the story is built on is not simply introvert versus extrovert or stability versus adventure, but the opposition between two different ways of engaging with experience. Poppy's way of going to the place, experiencing it directly, being in it bodily and immediately, versus Alex's way of understanding the world through the mediation of language, through the accumulated intelligence of what others have felt and written down. That opposition is present in the film but underdeveloped, and its underdevelopment leaves Alex feeling slightly flatter in the early sections of the film than he becomes once Bleak's performance has had sufficient time to fill in what the writing does not. These are genuine criticisms and they matter, but they are criticisms of a film that has been aiming high, that has been genuinely trying to do something more than the genre usually attempts, and that reaching, even when it falls short, is worth acknowledging and respecting. Now let me bring you into the world of how this film was actually made, because the story behind the story adds considerably to how you see what ends up on screen. People We Meet on Vacation began its journey to the screen from the moment Emily Henry's novel arrived at the top of the New York Times bestseller list in 2021 and immediately made the sort of cultural impact that puts a book into the conversation for adaptation before the first printing has even sold through. Henry's writing had already developed a devoted and enthusiastic readership, and the particular warmth and wit of this novel, its combination of funny and heartfelt, its modern sensibility, its central friendship that was both wholly convincing and deeply romantic, made it the kind of story that readers immediately described as cinematic. Not in the sense of being action filled or visually spectacular, but in the sense of feeling while you read it, like you were watching rather than reading. That quality of immediacy, of presence, is the quality that good adaptation catches. And it is the quality that Brett Haley, when he was brought to the project, identified as the thing he most needed to preserve. Haley's previous work positioned him as an ideal director for this material in a way that was not immediately obvious on the surface. Hearts Beat Loud, his 2018 film with Nick Offerman and Kiersey Clements, was a story about the specific tenderness between a father and a daughter in the summer before everything changes, told with an intimacy and emotional precision that felt genuinely rare for a film that was on paper a small-scale indie musical drama. All the Bright Places, his 2020 Netflix adaptation of Jennifer Niven's YA novel, was a more difficult film, dark and psychologically serious in ways that some found uneven, but that demonstrated Ellie's willingness to stay in uncomfortable emotional territory rather than deflecting to safety. What both films shared was a commitment to interior life, to the psychological reality of characters who feel things deeply and express them obliquely, and that commitment was exactly what People We Meet on Vacation needed in its director. Halley has described his first reading of Henry's novel as an experience of recognition, of feeling very immediately that he understood who these people were and what the story was really about, underneath its genre surface. In his telling, the challenge was not understanding the material but making the adaptation choices, deciding which of the novel's many beautifully rendered vacation sequences would make it to screen, and which, however beloved by readers, would need to be reconceived or set aside. The book's structure, which is also non-linear but has the luxury of a novel's length to develop each flashback in full, had to be translated into a film's economy, where every scene must carry its full weight precisely and where the space for leisurely development is significantly constrained. The casting of Emily Bada as Poppy was a discovery rather than an inevitability. Beda had been building a career in television. She had compelling work behind her, the kind of varied portfolio that signals an actor capable of range, but had not yet had a film role of this scale or this emotional demand. The audition process for Poppy was, by accounts from the production, extensive precisely because the role required someone who could carry the emotional weight of a film's lead while also projecting the specific likeness and energy of a person who moves through the world the way Poppy does, with a kind of inspired restlessness, an appetite for the new, that could easily shade into flightiness if the actor playing her does not ground it in genuine feeling. Bader solved this by playing Poppy's restlessness as a symptom rather than a character trait, as the behavioral expression of a deeper and more complicated fear, the fear of being too much for someone, of loving at an intensity that cannot be reciprocated without overwhelming the person receiving it. That reading transformed the character, and Hailey recognized it immediately as the key that unlocked the role. Tom Blyth's casting carries its own fascinating context. He was, at the time of the film's production, best known to the wider public for his performance as the young Coriolanus Snow in The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, a role that required him to embody cold ambition and controlled menace with considerable skill. Alex is, in almost every way, the diametric opposite of that character, and the intelligence of the casting is in recognizing that the same quality that made Blyth so effective in the Snow role, his ability to communicate enormous internal complexity through precise, minimal external expression, would serve Alex's emotional restraint in a completely different register. Alex is not good. He is warm, deeply warm. But he has the same quality of profound interior life, held carefully behind a controlled surface, and Blyth understands that quality from the inside and can play it without making it feel closed or inaccessible. The audience needs to be able to see into Alex's interior even as Alex himself is keeping it contained, and Blyth manages this throughout. The film was shot across multiple locations that were central to its identity, real places, not constructed approximations. Barcelona was filmed in Barcelona. Squamish was filmed in Squamish. New Orleans was filmed in New Orleans. This decision, which seems obvious given the subject matter of the story, was not without its production challenges. Shooting in rural international locations with a narrative that moves across a decade's worth of geography required a level of logistical complexity that a studio-controlled environment would have simplified considerably. But Ailey was committed to the authenticity of real place, to the specificity of actual morning light in actual Barcelona, the specificity of actual forest air in actual Squamish, because the film's central argument is that the places you go together are changed by who you go with. You cannot make that argument convincingly in a set that is pretending to be somewhere real. Here is a fact that reshapes how you see a particular moment in the film. The blonde guest seated next to Poppy at David's wedding in Barcelona is Emily Henry herself, the author of the novel. It is a brief cameo. She appears for only a few seconds, and if you do not know to look for her, you will not notice her. But the choice to place Henry at the wedding, at the culminating event of the story she created, is deeply meaningful. It is Henry watching her characters finally arrive at the thing she always knew they were moving toward. It is the author present in the story's most important room. When you go back and watch that scene knowing she is there, there is something in her expression, quiet, pleased, perhaps slightly emotional, that gives the moment an unexpected extra layer. She is the first person, in the world of the film, to see Poppy and Alex as they finally are together. And she earned that position. Here is a second fact. During the filming of the road trip sequence, the earliest chronological moment in the story, when young Poppy and young Alex share that car ride home from Boston, there were continuity issues with Emily Bader's hair that were never fully corrected in post. Her hair changes color and texture between shots in that sequence, shifting from more auburn to more brunette, from curlier to wavier. This is the kind of detail that dedicated viewers have noted with some amusement in their reviews. What is interesting about it, from a production standpoint, is that it made it through to the final cut of a major Netflix release, which suggests either that it was genuinely not noticed in time to fix, or that it was noticed and judged not significant enough to correct. Either way, it is a reminder that films are made by human beings under pressure and constraint, and that even the most carefully produced work carries its imperfections. The continuity issue does not affect the emotional impact of the sequence at all, but it does, when you know to look for it, add a slightly endearing quality to what is already a deliberately unpolished, youthful feeling section of the film. A third fact that adds meaning. Haley has described the production's approach to the vacation sequences as essentially immersive research. The cast and crew spent time in each location before filming began, eating in the restaurants, walking the streets, experiencing the cities and landscapes as tourists, rather than as film professionals with a schedule to execute. Haley wanted the footage to carry the specific quality of a genuine first encounter with a place, the slightly dazzled, slightly overwhelmed feeling of someone seeing something remarkable for the first time, and he believed that could only be achieved if the people in the frame had actually had something like that experience. When you watch the New Orleans sequence and notice a particular quality in the way Badar and Blyth look at the city around them, a quality that is slightly too genuine to be entirely performed, this is the reason. They were not entirely performing it. They had been in New Orleans. They had eaten in those streets. They had felt the specific weight of that city's air. and it shows. A fourth fact that changes how you see the film's structure. The screenplay went through numerous drafts before reaching the version that was filmed, and one of the significant structural changes between early drafts and the final film was the decision to anchor the present-day timeline in Barcelona rather than distributing the present more evenly across the film's running time. In earlier versions, the story moved more freely through present and past in a way that gave more weight to the aftermath of the 2 year silence, more scenes of Poppy's life in New York between the friendship breaking and her decision to go to Barcelona. The decision to compress the present into Barcelona, to make the film almost entirely a story of one consequential week and the 10 years of memory that saturated, was the change that gave the final film its particular emotional focus. It is a decision that costs the story some contextual richness, but gains in concentration and intensity, and having seen the film as it is difficult to imagine it structured otherwise. A fifth and final fact: Emily Henry visited the set during production in Barcelona, and by all accounts, her presence was an important one for the cast and crew. Not in the direction giving sense, but in the sense that her emotional investment in the story and characters was visible and contagious. She has spoken publicly about the experience of seeing her characters walk and talk in a real city, in real sunlight, with real people inhabiting them. There is something that she said in an interview that I want to bring you, in my own words, because it speaks to something fundamental about what this story is and why it matters to the people who love it. She said that what she always wanted readers to feel reading the book was not the excitement of the romantic payoff, but the ache of all the years before it, the specific tenderness of watching two people love each other in a form that is real and beautiful and not yet complete. That ache, she said, is the thing she hoped the film would carry. Having watched the film, I can tell you that it does. It carries it completely. The world receive people we meet on vacation in the way that genuinely good romantic films are often received on streaming platforms, with a wave of enthusiasm from a large and emotionally engaged general audience, and with a more measured, qualified response from the critical establishment, and with the interesting tension between those two receptions forming its own kind of commentary on what romantic comedy is for and who gets to decide whether it has succeeded. The film arrived on Netflix the 20th. This was not entirely surprising given the source material's cultural profile. Emily Henry's novel had sold over 2 million copies in the United States alone, and her readership is both passionate and active, the kind of audience that shows up for adaptations with real intent and real emotional investment. But the numbers also reflected a broader appetite, reaching well beyond the book's existing readership into the general population of people who wanted to feel something warm and true in January, which is the month that perhaps most needs that kind of film. Netflix does not release specific viewing figures in the traditional sense, but industry tracking suggested that People We Meet on Vacation had one of the stronger opening weekends for a romantic film on the platform in recent memory, and its performance in the weeks following suggested genuine staying power rather than the spike and drop pattern that characterizes purely event-driven viewing. The critical response landed at 76% on Rotten Tomatoes from 66 critics, a number that did not for third. The critical consensus on the aggregator describes it as a breezy adaptation with charming leads that delivers a romantic endeavor worth staying for. That summary is accurate as far as it goes, and also somewhat limited in its ambitions in the way that critical consensus summaries often are. It tells you what the film does competently without telling you about the moments when it does something more than that. Metacritic's weighted average placed the film at 50 out of 100, which reflects the critical division more sharply, with some reviewers responding warmly to the film's emotional intelligence and performances, and others finding it pleasant but underpowered, a film that does everything correctly without quite doing anything memorably. What is interesting about the critical conversation around the film is the degree to which it became a conversation about adaptation, about what is lost and what is. Many of the most thoughtful critical responses were written by reviewers who had read Henry's book and who brought to the film a set of expectations and a set of accumulated emotional attachments that inevitably shaped how they received the film's choices. critics who came to the film without having read the novel tended to be more purely positive, responding to what the film actually delivers rather than measuring it against what the novel contained. Critics who knew the book were more divided, some generously acknowledging that the film found the heart of the story, even if it could not preserve everything, and these things lost in translation were precisely the things that made the novel special. The specific critical complaints that recurred most consistently were the film's consisting with the film's compressed ending, which I have already discussed at some length, and which virtually every tweeted corrected who several bis edit stays at some length, and which wait at mobeg. That last criticism is, I think, the least valid of the three. The film's patience in its early sections is a genuine virtue, not a flaw, but it reflects a real difference in what critics and audiences bring to romantic drama and what they are willing to wait for. The audience response diverged from the critical response in a way that was both predictable and meaningful. Audiences on the whole loved this film more fully and more straightforwardly than the critics did. The IMDb score settled around 6.6, which technically places it in the positive but not exceptional category. But the written reviews on that platform and on Letterboxd tell a more nuanced story. A story of an audience deeply split between those who had read the book and found the film an imperfect but genuinely moving adaptation, and those who had not read the book and found the film a genuinely moving adaptation, and those who had not read the book and found the film a genuinely satisfying romantic experience. Among the second group, the response was frequently enthusiastic in the warm, personal "I felt this deeply" registered that romantic films inspire when they are working correctly. The comment sections on streaming adjacent platforms were full of people describing watching the film twice in the same week, or describing the ending as having made them cry in a way they had not expected, or describing the Poppy and Alex relationship as feeling more real than most film relationships they had encountered. This split between reader and non-reader response is worth dwelling on for a moment because it reveals something about what makes this particular story difficult to adapt and about the specific one equal belief they can create in a novel. The interiority of the characters, their thoughts, their self-awareness, their private processing of everything that happens between them is available to the reader directly, without mediation. Emily Henry's narration in the novel gives us Poppy's interior in rich specific detail. We know what she is thinking during the New Orleans honeymoon pretense. We know the exact quality of her fear when Alex comes to New York to take care of her during the Norway cancellation. We know the shape of her love for him with a precision that the novel's language makes possible. Film cannot do this. Film must externalize what the novel keeps internal, must find visual and behavioral language for what the novel expresses directly, and this translation always involves some loss of texture, some compression of experience, some sacrifice of the particular in favor of the readable. What the film version of People We Meet on Vacation loses relative to the novel is primarily this interiority, and readers who knew the novel's version of Poppy's interior felt that loss acutely. Non-readers, encountering Poppy without that comparison, found Emily Barder's performance sufficient and often considerably more than sufficient to make the character alive and knowable. The streaming life of the film has been robust and growing. By its second month on Netflix, audience tracking indicated that People We Meet on Vacation had become one of those streaming films that circulates through word of mouth in a way that is qualitatively different from marketing-driven discovery. People were recommending it to friends in the specific personal "you need to watch this" register that indicates genuine emotional impact rather than casual approval. The film appeared on multiple year-beginning lists of films to watch in January, was regularly cited on social platforms in conversations about the best romantic content on Netflix, and generated a sustained discussion about the friends to lovers trope that extended well beyond the usual promotional window of a new release. It is worth pausing to note that the film arrived into a cultural moment when the romantic comedy, as a genre, was in a complicated state. The mid-2010s were defined by a significant revival of the form. Films like Crazy Rich Asians, Set It Up, and To All the Boys I've Loved Before demonstrated that the genre could work in the streaming era with fresh energy and genuine emotional intelligence. But by the mid 2020s, the volume of romantic content produced for streaming had created a kind of saturation that made genuine distinction harder to achieve. There were simply a great many romantic films available, many of them pleasant and competent and thoroughly forgettable, and the challenge for any new entry in the genre was to be something more than pleasant and competent, to have a reason to exist that went beyond filling a content slot. People We Meet on Vacation, with its non-linear structure, its depth of characterization, its commitment to the interior life of its central relationship, had that reason. It was genuinely trying to do something more than the genre floor required. And while the critical consensus suggested it did not fully succeed in every ambition it set for itself, the audience response, the sustained, personal, emotionally driven enthusiasm that characterized the film's second wave discovery on streaming, suggested that it succeeded where it most needed to in making something that felt real to the people who watched it. In terms of formal awards recognition, the film received nominations in several categories relevant to Sternberger and Tom Blyth, tar Betrong, the most often sa Pakempidre. Whether those nominations resulted in wins is less important than what they signified, an acknowledgement from within the industry that this was a film that had done something beyond the routine, that deserved to be considered seriously in conversation about craft and performance. What was perhaps overlooked from an awards perspective was the editing, which I have already argued is doing work of real sophistication in managing the film's non-linear structure. The editing of romantic films is rarely recognized in the way that the editing of thrillers or action films is, as though the precision of an emotional cut carries less technical merit than the precision of an action cut, and that is an oversight the film community continues to perpetuate unfairly. This film is not part of a franchise. It does not belong to a series and does not require dissection of a franchise analysis. So let us move directly into what I think is the most important territory this essay needs to cover, what this film is actually saying, beneath its genre surface, beneath its beautiful locations and its charming leads and its friends to lovers architecture. What this film understands is something about the relationship between freedom and love that most romantic films get exactly backwards. The conventional romantic narrative, in its most basic form, is a story of restriction of a free individual who encounters love and is, in being loved and loving in return, tethered. Freedom and love in this telling are in tension. You gain one by giving up the other. The film's premise appears to be heading directly toward this conventional conclusion. Free-spirited Poppy will have to settle, will have to compromise her wandering nature, will have to accept the tether of a committed love in a specific place. But here is the thing about what this film actually does with that premise. It refuses the tether entirely. It argues quietly but consistently that love is not the thing that ends freedom. It is the thing that makes freedom possible. That you cannot be fully free in your movement through the world if you are carrying a private grief, a private longing, a private question that has no answer. That the annual vacation that Poppy and Alex have been taking together for a decade has been the freest she has ever felt, not despite his presence but because of it. That freedom is not the absence of attachment. It is the presence of exactly the right attachment. This is the emotional and intellectual core of the film, and it is a genuinely interesting idea rather than a comfortable platitude. The conventional romantic comedy says, "You are free, now you are loved." People We Meet on Vacation says, "You were lonely while appearing free, and you will be genuinely free only when you stop running from the thing that would make you whole." That distinction is small enough to miss if you are not looking for it, and profound enough to reshape the entire meaning of the story if you catch it. Poppy's travel writing is the film's central symbol, and it is worth thinking about carefully because it operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Travel writing is professionally the act of translating experience into language, of going somewhere, feeling something, and then finding the words that communicate that feeling to someone who was not there. It requires both the adventure of the going and the craftsmanship of the telling, and Poppy, at her film's beginning, has lost the ability to feel what she goes to feel. She is still going. She is still technically doing the work. But the translation has broken down. The experience no longer moves her. She is writing descriptions of places that she is not truly arriving at. She is technically present in beautiful cities while being fundamentally absent from them. Think about what that means in relation to the film's argument about love and freedom. The travel, which should be freedom, which should be the fullest expression of Poppy's nature, has become mechanical, empty. The movement has lost its meaning. And the reason which the film is careful never to state too directly is that Poppy has been traveling away from something rather than towards something. And that kind of travel, however geographically ambitious, is not really travel at all. It is avoidance in motion. It is a very beautiful avoidance and it produces publishable copy, but it does not produce the feeling of being alive that travel is supposed to provide. The restoration of that feeling, which is what the Barcelona week and Alex's presence in Barcelona gradually accomplishes, is the film's emotional journey. It is Poppy learning to arrive again, to actually be in the place she is in, and the thing that teaches her to arrive again is the confrontation with the thing she has been traveling away from. The motif of the annual vacation, which recurs throughout the film, accumulates meaning with each iteration. Each vacation adds another layer to the shared world that Bobby and Alex have built, and each vacation also marks another year of the thing they have not said. The accumulation of vacations is simultaneously the accumulation of love and the accumulation of silence, and the film uses this double meaning with great intelligence. By the time we have seen enough of the vacations, we understand that the annual ritual, which began as a casual plan and became a commitment, has been the real relationship all along. Not a substitute for the relationship they might have had, not a consolation prize, the real thing in its own form with its own truth. The film's argument is not that the friendship was a lesser version of love, it is that the friendship was love, it simply needed one more form to find its full expression. The recurring image of Poppy looking out at something, a city, a mountain, a horizon, is also worth tracing through the film. In the early flashbacks, this looking has a quality of appetite, of genuine hunger for the world. In the present day sections, it has a quality of distance. She is looking but not quite arriving at what she sees. And in the film's final movement, after she has made her confession to Alex in Linfield and after the two of them have found their way to each other, the film ends on a moment of Poppy and Alex together somewhere beautiful. The detail left deliberately vague, deliberately general, because the specific destination matters less than the fact of the going. And in that final, the looking has changed again. She is not looking away from something. She is not looking at a distance with appetite that cannot be satisfied. She is simply looking, present, arrive, home, wherever home turns out to be. The film is also, in a way that is rarely discussed in its critical reception, a genuinely honest examination of what happens to female ambition in the context of romantic love. Poppy has built a career that many people would envy. She travels, she writes, she has made a life out of her greatest pleasure, and the film does not ask her to give that up. It does not suggest that her ambition was a coping mechanism that love will cure, or that her career was a distraction from the real business of being loved. What it suggests instead is that she has been using the career in a way that has stopped being about the career. She has been using motion as a way of not having to face the thing that frightens her most, which is not failure, but success. Not the possibility that she loves Alex and he does not love her back, but the possibility that she loves Alex and he does love her back, and she might still be too much for him. Still too chaotic, still hungry and restless and difficult, even for the person who knows her best. That is a fear worth taking seriously, and the film takes it seriously. It does not resolve it by making Poppy suddenly comfortable with her own intensity. It resolves it by giving her a person who finds her intensity not threatening but essential, who has loved exactly that quality in her, without compromise, for decades. This is what this film really says underneath everything. It says that the people who love you most are not the ones who have accepted your flaws despite themselves. They are the ones who would not have you any other way. And finding that out, truly finding it out, from a person who has had ample opportunity to be exhausted by you and who instead chose year after year to show up at an airport for another week, is the most frightening and most liberating thing that can happen to a person who has always been afraid of being too much. The cultural conversation this film arrived into is worth mapping carefully, because People We Meet on Vacation is not a film that exists in a vacuum. It arrived into a specific cultural moment that shaped how it was received and what it meant to the people who found it. The early months of 2026 were, in terms of romantic cultural output, a moment of genuine hunger for sincerity. The ironic, meta-aware, self-deconstructing romantic content that had dominated much of the previous decade. The films and shows that acknowledged the genre's conventions even as they deployed them, that winked at the audience about the predictability of the story they were watching, had begun to feel exhausted. The pendulum had swung far enough toward irony that audiences were beginning to want something that simply meant what it said, that simply believed in its own love story without hedging it or framing it in quotation marks. People We Meet on Vacation is exactly that kind of film. It is earnest without apology. It believes in love and in friendship, and in the possibility that the right person for you might have been in your life for a decade without you quite knowing how to name it, and it makes this argument without irony, without self consciousness, without the protective armor of genre self awareness. And that sincerity, landing in a cultural moment hungry for exactly that quality, was a significant part of why the film connected with its audience as deeply as it did. The film also arrived at a moment when the friends to lovers narrative was both ubiquitous and contested in cultural conversation. The trope has a long history in romantic fiction, from Jane Austen's foundational versions of it, through the 20th century's many iterations to the contemporary romance novels' enthusiastic embrace of it. Emily Henry's novel is, in many ways, a definitive contemporary treatment of the trope, a version so fully realized and emotionally intelligent that it has become a reference point for the entire category of friends to lovers fiction. The film, by bridging that version to the screen, participated in a cultural conversation about the trope that was already well underway, and it contributed to it by demonstrating that the friends to lovers narrative, when done with genuine depth and real character work, is not a cliche but an archetype, a story that recurs because it is genuinely true about how love sometimes develops, and that can always be told freshly if the people telling it bring authentic feeling to its telling. The question of whether this film works, I think, on one level, it is deeply of its time. It reflects a specific contemporary sensibility about relationships, about the intersection of career and love, about the way modern life blurs the boundaries of friendship and desire, and the ways that digital connection simultaneously and complicates long distance relationships. The texting, the social media presence, the specific modern loneliness of being always technically reachable and never quite truly reached, these are contemporary textures that the film captures accurately. But the emotional core, the decade of love quietly held, the annual ritual that is both celebration and deferral, the final reckoning with the thing that has been avoided, this is timeless. These are feelings that humans have been having for as long as there have been humans, and the film's treatment of them at its best has the quality of something that will remain true and recognizable long after its specific contemporary details have dated. The film's influence on the romantic film landscape will be measured ultimately not by its award or its particular consensus, but by whether other filmmakers look at it and understand something about what attempted it, it understand, something about what it attempted it, and it will like what I fact that conversation is already beginning. Whether it will result in a genuine shift in the genre's ambitions remains to be seen. But the film itself is a contribution worth making, and it is a contribution that deserves to be recognized as such. From this moment, we go into full spoilers. If you have not yet seen this film, stop here, go experience it first, and come back. some things deserve to be felt before they are understood. What remains to be said about people we meet on vacation, now that we are past the threshold of what the film holds back and into the territory of what it fully reveals, is the story of its ending, which is to say, the story of everything the film has been building toward, and whether the building was worth the destination, and what the destination actually means once you arrive at it. Let me begin with the moment that everything turns understandable actually means once you arrive at it. Let me begin with the moment that everything is thing. Yes. 2 years before Barcelona, Poppy and Alex are in New York together. Alex has come for the Norway trip that never happened, has come to take care of her instead. He is sitting on her floor, reading to her, being present in the way that only he can be present for her. And Poppy, in that moment, understands something that she has probably been approaching for years. She understands that she is in love with Alex. Not the warm, diffuse, undirected love of a deep friendship. The specific, directed, irreversible love of the romantic kind. The kind that requires a response. The kind that, once acknowledged to yourself, cannot be unacknowledged. And here is what she does with that knowledge. She does not tell him, she sits with it, alone, on her couch, while he reads to her, while the city goes on outside her window, while the person she loves more than she has ever loved anyone sits on her floor and is entirely, entirely present for her, and she says nothing. Why? The film does not explain this in a single scene or a single line of dialogue because it has been explaining it for 90 minutes. Poppy is afraid of being too much. Not too much in the abstract, performative way. Too much for the world. Too much energy. Too many feelings. Too much for Alex. Too much for the specific, careful, measured man who has somehow found her manageable and lovable for a decade. She is afraid that if she names what she feels, the feeling will be larger than what he signed up for, that it will be larger than the friendship can hold, that it will break the one thing she cannot afford to break. So she says nothing, and then she does something worse than nothing. She does something that the film handles with real psychological precision, and that I think is the single most truthful moment in the screenplay. In the weeks after Alex's visit, she begins to pull away. She doesn't stop the friendship with a dramatic gesture or a defining confrontation. She simply becomes less available. The calls get shorter, the texts get sparser, the response times get longer. She creates, through incremental withdrawal, the space that she cannot create through honesty, because honesty would require a confrontation that might end the friendship and the withdrawal might not, might just be interpreted as a busy period, might just be the rhythm of two people's lives diverging slightly, temporarily, might not be the earthquake that a declaration of love would definitely be. Alex feels it. Of course he feels it. He notices the withdrawal the way you notice when a light that has been on in a room you rely on begins to dim. He reaches for her a few times, a message that goes unanswered for longer than usual, a call that is returned with something slightly formal in her voice. And then at some point in those 2 years, he stops reaching, not because he has stopped caring. The film makes this entirely clear. He stops reaching because he is protecting himself, because the withdrawal, however unintentionally communicated, has told him something. And what it has told him, but he draws from Poppy's increased distance, in the absence of any other explanation, is that she does not want what he wants, that his feelings, which she has somehow sensed and which his own behavior has perhaps finally made legible to her, are not returned. That the friendship, in the form it was, has reached a boundary she is not willing to cross. He is wrong about this. But he is wrong in the exact way that a careful, emotionally intelligent person is wrong when they are working with incomplete information and protecting themselves from the alternative. He is not misreading her. He is correctly reading what she is communicating, which is retreat without access to the reason for the retreat. And so 2 years passed, 2 years of silence in the space where a decade of presence had been. Two people, separately carrying the same loss in different ways. Poppy moving from place to place and feeling nothing. Alex staying in Linfield and teaching and reading and living the life that is his, without the specific annual light that had been its most beautiful feature. Barcelona is the reckoning. But the film is careful to establish that Barcelona begins as a performance, not a reckoning. Poppy arrives still protecting herself, still within the framework of the lie she has constructed, the lie that she is here for work, not for him. She has not yet made the full choice. She is testing the water. She is seeing whether the friendship can be reconstituted in its previous form, whether the 2 year distance can be bridged without anything needing to be confessed, whether she can have Alex back in her life without paying the price of honesty about why she lost him. The Barcelona scenes in the film's present are exquisite in their specific awkwardness, the particular quality of two people who know each other deeply but are navigating a new politeness with each other, a careful formality that it has grown old than could make. They are still Poppy and Alex in their bones. The references are still there, the shorthand still emerges, the ease still breaks through occasionally like sunlight through gaps in cloud. But there is something else present too, something that the film communicates primarily through pauses. The fractional hesitations before a question is answered, the way love dies slightly sooner than it would have 3 years ago, the physical distance maintained even in moments when their old selves would have been comfortably close. The air conditioning scene is the film's most important single sequence, and I want to give it the space it deserves. Alex hurts his back trying to fix the broken unit in Poppy's hotel room. He has to lie still. They are both marooned in a slightly too warm room in a beautiful city with nowhere to be and no way to avoid each other. And in that enforced stillness, which the film has set up with obvious intentionality, because stillness is the condition that their entire relationship has been avoiding. They begin to talk, not carefully, not with the new Barcelona formality. Just talk, the way they always talked in tents and restaurants and cars and apartments all over the world for 10 years. The familiar rhythm returns. The want returns, and the film watches it return with something that functions as narrative relief. Relief that feels genuine, not manipulated, because you have been waiting for it, sitting with the awkwardness, feeling the distance, and the return of that ease is felt physically, like the release of a breath you have been holding. It is in this scene that the memories begin. The New Orleans trip comes back first. Poppy bringing it up almost casually, a reference point, we've been here before, and then the Norway trip. And in the telling and retelling of these memories, in the shared navigation of all the places they have been together, something shifts in the room. The past and present begin to press against each other. The memories are not just memories in the scene, they are arguments. They are evidence. Evidence that something real has existed between them, does exist, cannot be explained away or stored safely at a distance. And Alex, lying still for the first time in the film, deprived of the ability to leave the room or change the subject through activity, feels this and begins to let himself feel it. There is a moment in this scene, and this is the kind of moment that film can do, and almost no other medium can do in quite this way, where the conversation has stopped, the memories have been told, and both of them are simply present in the quiet room with the city beyond the window, and the broken air conditioning, and the weight of everything that has been said in the last hour. And Tom Blyth does something extraordinary. He does nothing. He lies still and he lets Alex be present in the truth of what is happening. And you can see him. Watch this scene again and you will see it. Made the decision not to speak yet, but to stop pretending, to let himself know what he knows, and stop arranging his face to communicate something other than what he feels. It is one of the finest single moments of film acting I have seen in a romantic film in years, and it lasts perhaps 4 seconds. And if you blink, you might miss it, and if you catch it, it retroactively transforms every scene that came before it. The wedding rehearsal dinner is where the film moves into its final phase. Alex invites Poppy. She goes. The lie about being in Barcelona for work is discovered. Alex's brother knows she is not here professionally, and through him, Alex learns the truth. She came here for him. She came here on purpose, for him. And whatever Alex had been allowing himself to know in the quiet of the hotel room expands. in the knowledge of this deliberate journey she has made into something he can no longer arrange his face against. What follows is the scene I described earlier as the film's most crucial confrontation, but I want to give it its full weight here, in the spoiler territory where it can be examined openly. Poppy and Alex are finally honest with each other in Barcelona in the way they should have been 2 years earlier, and what emerges from that honesty is simultaneously the love story and the central problem of the love story given its fullest articulation. He broke up with Sarah because of her he has known for years, longer than she has admitted to knowing. He has been carrying the same weight she has been carrying across the same 2 years of silence, having arrived at the same understanding by a different path and at a different moment. They are in love with each other. This is no longer a question, and then they sleep together. And here the film does something that I respect enormously. It refuses to treat the sex as the resolution. The sex is not the ending. It is not the proof that the love is real or the story is over. It is a continuation, a deepening, a new form of something that was already real. And the morning after, when they attend the wedding together and move through that beautiful golden day with the warmth of what they have finally allowed themselves, there is joy in it, genuine, radiant, unguarded joy, but also a question that neither of them has asked yet. What now? Alex asks it first. At the wedding reception, in a moment of happiness and also of vulnerability, because he is a man who has spent a decade loving a woman who moves through the world at a speed he cannot match, and he needs to know whether what they have just found is a place they are both willing to inhabit permanently. He asks about their future with the specific, direct, I need to know quality of someone who has finally let himself want something and cannot immediately suppress the wanting once it is out. And Poppy hesitates. She says she needs time to figure things out. This hesitation is the most psychologically precise moment in the film. It is not Poppy not loving him. It is Poppy's deepest fear, the one she has carried for 10 years and that the 24 hours of Barcelona have not yet dissolved. The fear of being too much, of not being enough, of the love being real and still, somehow, not working. She has never been in a relationship that lasted. She has always been the person who needs the next place, the next experience, the next thing to discover. What happens when the next thing is a person in Linfield, Ohio? What happens to the travel writer who is home? What happens to the free spirit who has finally found the specific gravity she has been both seeking and fleeing her entire adult life? Alex, hearing the hesitation, hears something else. He hears the withdrawal, the same retreat he heard 2 years ago in the shortening messages and the longer silences, and he reacts from that old wound. He says what he has been holding for 2 years, that she does not know what she wants, that she runs from her problems through vacations, that she uses motion as an avoidance of the things she is afraid to feel. He is not entirely wrong, but he is also not entirely right. And his willingness to say it in that way, in that moment of her hesitation, reveals that beneath his quietness is a wound that has not been addressed, that the 2 year silence was not simply a loss of a friendship for him, but a loss of something he had known was irreplaceable, and that the pain of it is still present and is being activated by anything that looks even slightly like another version of that same withdrawal. They part badly. They leave the reception on different emotional terms than they arrived. The morning brings Poppy to an airport, and it brings her, in the film's most quietly devastating piece of staging, to Sarah. The two women have never been close. They have met before through Alex, but have always existed in a relationship defined by their relationship to him. Poppy as the best friend, Sarah as the girlfriend, a careful triad of competing attachments that no one ever quite named. And now Sarah, who has already let Alex go, who has already made the private reckoning with what her relationship to him actually was and was not, says something to Poppy that is both generous and precise. She says that the breakup was not entirely about Poppy, that Sarah did not know what she wanted from her own life, that she needed something Alex could not give her, and that in letting him go she was also letting herself go towards something better. She does not blame Poppy. She does not absolve her entirely, she simply is honest. She simply tells the truth about her own experience of the thing that happened, and in doing so, she gives Poppy something she did not expect to receive, a kind of permission not to steal Alex, not to be absolved of having been part of the complication, but permission to stop carrying alone the full weight of the 2 years' silence. The weight was shared. The loss was mutual. The next step, if there is a next step, belongs to both of them. Poppy resigns from her job. This moment in the film is handled quickly, a practical decision that has enormous emotional weight, and I want to give it the attention it deserves. Poppy resigning from her travel writing job is not a sacrifice of her identity. It is a recognition that the job, in the form she has been doing it, has stopped being what she needs. She has been a travel writer who could not arrive anywhere. Resigning is not giving up travel, it is giving up the version of travel that has been a form of running and choosing a different relationship with the world and with motion, one that is not defined by escaping but by returning. That distinction is quiet but profound. She goes to Linfield, she finds Alex, and the scene between them in Linfield is the film's emotional culmination, the moment everything has been building to, the scene that the entire 115 minutes has been preparing. Poppy tells him that she is afraid of being too much, that she has always been afraid of that she knows she is difficult and restless, and that she does not stay, and that she has spent her entire adult life managing the fear that the people she loves most will eventually find her exhausting. She does not ask him to reassure her, she simply tells him the truth, the full truth, without the armor that travel and motion and the carefully maintained busyness of her life have always provided. She is entirely still in Linfield, Ohio, which is the most specific opposite of everywhere she has ever been, and she tells him the thing she has been unable to say. And Alex hears it. The film does not give us a speech in response, and this is exactly right. He hears it and he responds to it not with words but with presence, with the specific characteristic Alex shaped presence that has been his form of love for 10 years. He is simply there. He does not tell her she is not too much. He does not argue with her assessment of herself. He simply demonstrates by being exactly who he is and by being entirely here that whatever too much means, it is not a category that applies between them. The final sequence of the film, the brief time jump that shows us Alex having moved to New York, the two of them resumed on their vacations together, moving through the world now in the full knowledge of what they are to each other, is a quiet triumph of form. The film ends not with a grand gesture or dramatic arrival, but with exactly what it began with, two people going somewhere together. Except that now, in the going, there is no weight of the unsaid. There is no annual ritual that is simultaneously a celebration and a deferral. There is just the word and the two of them in it, and the specific freedom of moving toward rather than away from the thing that makes the movement meaningful. There is a foreshadowing detail early in the film that reveals itself fully only at the end, and it is the kind of detail that makes a second viewing of a film feel like a different film entirely. When Poppy first describes her job to someone early in the Barcelona section, she says something about how travel writing is the art of arriving in a place and making someone who has never been there feel like they already know it. The line passes quickly, it sounds like professional description. But on second viewing, understanding now what the film is about at its core, you hear it differently. Poppy has been making other people feel like they have arrived at places she herself has never quite reached. She has been a guide to a form of presence she could not access herself. And the journey of the film, the real journey, the interior one, is her finally arriving, finally getting to the destination she has been pointing toward for a decade. And the destination is not a place. The destination is a person. The destination is Alex. The destination is herself, fully present and fully known, in the arms of someone who has been waiting at the arrival gate for 10 years. That is the ending. That is what this film builds to. And it is, in its quiet, unhurried, deeply felt way, one of the most complete romantic resolutions I have encountered in a genre film in recent memory. What this film left behind in me is not something I can describe with complete precision, and I think that imprecision is itself the point. The films that leave the cleanest impressions are often not the ones that go deepest. The films that go deepest leave something that resists summary, a quality of feeling that continues to exist in the background of ordinary life for weeks after the watching, surfacing occasionally in odd moments, in the specifics of a late afternoon or a conversation or a glance out of a window at a city that is briefly, inexplicably, the same quality of gold that Barcelona was. The single moment that has not left me is not the ending, though the ending is earned and beautiful. It is Tom Blyth lying on the floor of a hotel room with a bad back and a broken air conditioner, and the woman he has loved for 10 years talking beside him, making the decision to let himself know what he knows those 4 seconds. That particular irreplaceable quality of a human face in the moment it stops pretending. I have thought about that moment in the weeks since watching this film, more than I have thought about most things I have encountered in cinema recently, and I think the reason is this. It is true, not true in the sense that it depicts something that happened, true in the sense that it depicts something that is real about how people actually carry love, quietly, carefully, protectively, and that enormous private cost and the recognition of that truth is the kind of recognition that stays. Did this film change how I see something? I think it did, though the change is modest rather than transformative, and I would not want to overstate it. It reminded me, not taught me for the first time, because these things are not lessons you learn once, that the most important things we say to each other are rarely the most important things we say to each other, that the decade of showing up is the declaration, that presence, sustained and deliberate and year after year, is its own form of language, one that requires no confession to be fully understood by the person receiving it. Alex never told Poppy he loved her during the decade of vacations. He simply went, he simply kept coming back. He simply arranged every year to be in whatever strange and beautiful place she chose, and he brought his books and his quietness and his extraordinary capacity for being fully present with her, and he offered all of that without name or condition for 10 years. If that is not a declaration, then the word declaration has lost its meaning. I would return to this film. I would return to it for the performances, which reward rewatching in the specific way that performances built on interiority and restraint always reward rewatching, because the second time, knowing what each character knows about themselves and about each other, the early scenes are different films. The road trip from Boston, which on first viewing is the charming opening chapter of an unlikely friendship, is on second viewing the opening chapter of a love story that neither person knows is happening yet. The Squamish camping trip, which is a moment of warmth and commitment to the friendship, is on second viewing Alex understanding something about himself that he is not yet ready to name. Every scene has a second layer, and that second layer is richer for being discovered rather than declared. The kind of person who will carry this film with them is not a mystery to me. They are the person who has loved someone in the slow, careful, accumulating way, not the sudden, overwhelming, lightning strike version of love that fills so many films, but the kind that grows alongside a friendship, that arrives gradually and then suddenly is simply there, unmistakable and terrifying in its completeness. They are the person who has sat beside someone at a table or on a train or in a tent and felt the full weight of what they felt and said nothing, and then said nothing again, and then kept saying nothing until the nothing became its own kind of answer. They are the person who understands that the years before the confession are not the prelude to the story, but the story itself, and who wants to see that version of love treated with the seriousness and the warmth and the deep abiding respect it deserves. People we meet on vacation is for them. It is for you, if that is who you are. Here is the complete experience in the full honest terms it deserves. People We Meet on Vacation is a romantic film that believes in its own love story. It earns that belief through the quality of its performances, through Emily Beddar's extraordinary interiority and Tom Blyth's masterful restraint, through Sarah Catherine Hook's dignified generosity and the supporting cast's warm, life-giving presence. It earns it through the intelligence of its screenplay, which understands that the most interesting territory in a love story is the decade before the ending, and that the ending matters only because of what precedes it. It earns it through Brett Haley's patient, close, genuinely empathetic direction, his refusal to use music to tell you what to feel, his preference for faces over landscapes, his trust in the audience's capacity to sit with something slow and real and earn the reward at the end. It earns it through a visual style that is modest and precise and exactly suited to its subject. It earns it, most of all, through the specific truth of what it understands about love, that freedom and attachment are not opposites, that home is not a place but a quality of presence, that the people who will love you for exactly who you are have often been sitting beside you all along, waiting for you to stop running long enough to notice. It is not a perfect film, its final act is too compressed for the emotional ambitions it has set for itself. The wedding reception argument and the Linfield reconciliation both deserve more space than the film gives them. Alex as a literary soul is underwritten in ways that cost the film some of its thematic richness. These are real flaws, and acknowledging them is part of taking the film seriously. Who will love this most deeply? The readers of Emily Henry's novel who approach the adaptation generously, willing to meet it on its own terms rather than hold it to the full breadth of the book. The people who have been in a friendship that was quietly, undeniably something more than a friendship, and who have never entirely known what to do with that knowledge. The people who believe that a romantic film can be genuinely about something, about freedom, about fear, about the courage of being fully known, and who are willing to wait 90 minutes for a 4-second moment of a man lying still on a hotel room floor and letting himself know what he knows. The people who would rather feel something true than watch something spectacular, who may not connect with it, those who come to the genre wanting faster narrative momentum, wanting the love story to arrive sooner and with more dramatic intensity, those who find the nonlinear structure frustrating rather than enriching, those who bring the full text of the novel to the screen and find the compression unforgivable, those who want a film that achieves everything it reaches for, rather than a film that reaches beautifully for several things and fully achieves most of them. Cinema or streaming. This is a streaming film in the most honest sense, made for Netflix, designed for the intimate screen, built around performances and dialogue, and the specific quality of faces in close-up that reward the television or laptop rather than the theater. It does not need a large screen. What it needs is the kind of quiet attention that you can give it in your own space, on your own time, ideally without interruption. It is the kind of film that benefits from a quiet evening and a willingness to let it take its time. If it is something you want to return to, and I believe it is, then it is something worth owning, if ownership is an option available to you, because its rewards genuinely accumulate across viewings. The rating? 8 out of 10, and the one true sentence that earns it. This film understands that the love story is not the destination, it is the recognition, finally and fully made, of the journey that has been the love story all along. And the line that feels like the last shot of this film, quiet, earned, true, every place Poppy ever traveled to was practice for learning how to arrive. Before I let you go, I want to take a moment to thank you for being here with me today. If this essay resonated with you, if something in the way I talked about this film landed in the same place it landed in me, then please consider leaving a like, because it tells me that this kind of work is worth making and it helps this channel find the people it is meant for. Subscribe if you have not yet, because there is more coming. And leave me a comment with your thoughts on this film, particularly if you have read Emily Henry's novel. I am deeply curious how readers of the book experienced this adaptation, and what they found preserved and what they found lost. I am also curious, have you ever been in a friendship that was quietly something more? And did it stay quiet? Tell me in the comments. The best conversations that happen on this channel happen there. What scene did you find most emotionally powerful in this film? Was it the hotel room floor? The Linfield confrontation? Something from the flashbacks that I have not spent enough time with? Let me know. There is no single correct answer to that question, and every answer tells me something true about the person giving it. In the next essay, we are spending time with a film that asks a completely different set of questions about identity, about memory, about the ways that the stories we tell about ourselves determine what we are able to become. It is a film that I have been thinking about for a long time, and I cannot wait to bring it to you. That is the Cine Flux. I will see you in the next one.